she's a mountain, then you're an ocean.
Hi, everybody. This is Lori, and I am the founder of a company called Inclusivity and also the author of a new book, You Can Save the World. In fact, you're the only one who can, which is all about sustainable living and taking care of the earth and each other. And this is our podcast, which is called Inclusivi Talks Sustainability. And on the podcast, we have wonderful people who are artists and creatives, and also people who are enmeshed or engaged in the sustainability field, in the sustainability world. And today we're doing actually our second episode with Vikki Reich, who is a writer and also a communication specialist. And Vikki, on our last episode, talked with us about how she got to where she is as far as her writing. And today we're going to continue that conversation. So Vikki, thank you for coming back.
Well, thank you for having me.
We are very glad to have you. So we had kind of left off, you had talked a bit about the fact that you were a social worker for a number of years. And it sounded like your creative path in high school and college really was music, that you were a musician and wrote music. And then kind of that tapered off a bit when you had children and other things took your time. And then you worked as a social worker for 15 years. And towards the end of that social work career, you started writing. And this time your writing took on it was a blog. So you started blogging and sort of shifted then to become a full-time creative. Is that kind of a good summary?
Yeah, I would think that, yeah. It sounds so cool when you say it.
Well, it is so cool. That's what's wonderful about it. So I wanted to ask today, we hadn't talked really about whether your work in social services in any way you think colored your writing or how that affected your life kind of going forward from there.
I think that, as I had mentioned in the kind of social work that I did, which was maltreatment investigations of vulnerable adults, so elder abuse and financial exploitation and sexual abuse and emotional abuse, those types of things were the things I was investigating day in and day out. And I think that some of the things that become clear to you when you're doing that kind of work is also systemic inequities. And, there were just so many problems that were intergenerational poverty and, systemic racism and all of those things that I couldn't fix because, I can go into a situation and say, wow, this is bad. But so much of what people were dealing with were things that I couldn't fix. There were no easy fix. And so, as a fellow Grinnell alum, I think that, Grinnell does a great job of broadening your horizons and really helping people have a bigger worldview and to be rooted and care about issues of social justice. And I think that in my work as a social worker, those inequities that I knew of rather intellectually became very clear to me in the concrete. And so I think that, after that, not just after that, but also that added to my own personal philosophy and also my experience as a lesbian and the discrimination that I had faced in my own life. I think we can't be divorced from those experiences anytime we tell a story, and so I think all of those experiences not only inform how I write about things, but, it also the why, and that idea of hoping to change people's hearts and minds and to actually make people think bigger than themselves and to think about the greater good.
I like that a lot.
Did that answer that?
It was a wonderful answer, and it was kind of a perfect answer for us because, as I said, our podcast really is about creatives, but also about sustainable living. And our definition of sustainability is, the same one that the UN employs and that our friends at Alliance for Sustainability employ, which is that it really encompasses the environment, but it also encompasses economic and social justice. And so, what you just talked about really touched on those themes of all of us need to live our lives with these things in mind. That we need to make decisions with these things in mind. And for me, I've started referring to that as seeing the world through a lens of sustainability. That every decision we make, we filter through this lens. And the cool thing is we already do that, right? We do it with lots of things like our religion or our political beliefs. All of those things already filter our decisions. So all I'm asking people to do is add that one extra lens. And so I think that brings us nicely to ask you, for you, what are the things around sustainable living that you feel most passionately about? What are the things that help define the way you live and the way you make choices?
Um, I always do try to keep in mind the greater picture and the bigger picture. And also, I don't know if it is my working class upbringing or what it is, but I'm also a pretty simple person. Like I like to live very simply. You know, I think that I'm capitalism, man. It is a heady drug, and I think that the older I get, the more I realize that drive that people have from this cultural indoctrination of needing more, and and I think also like having kids who are now teenagers and the culture that they're exposed to online and everything. And it's like, why wouldn't you want the big fancy car? And it's like, because I don't need the big fancy car. And it's not even, can I afford the big fancy car? Because I could probably do that if I wanted. But I really appreciate and kind of honor the simplicity of living now in maybe a way I didn't when I was younger,
Mhm.
and just feel really happy with a simple life in terms of possessions and goals and dreams. Not that I'm leading a small life,
Yeah.
but I just really don't need a lot of complication. And that's kind of what it means to me.
Mhm. I like that. And I think that that's a wonderful way to phrase it. We're really working on trying to get people to see sustainability in a broader context, and that it doesn't mean giving up everything, but it really can mean just focusing on what do I really want? What do I really need?
Hmm.
And sort of simplifying things a bit can be a wonderful way to obtain a more sustainable life.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true.
Yeah, I like that. So tell us, if you don't mind, what your philosophy of life is. If you had to sort of define that, what would you define it
Boy, I should have prepared something for this. Let me just
as?
so many. I have so many. I have
That's
so
okay.
many philosophies. Um, I guess my overriding principle or kind of the driving force for me is that I am a relationship focused person. I'm a connection focused person. And when it's all said and done, um, those are the things that I hope to be judged by. The relationships I built, the community I built, and the love that I have in my life. So I think that would be probably my biggest philosophy, kind of the overarching one.
To focus on relationships.
Yeah. And I think, especially in middle age, my idea of what success is has had to shift dramatically, not just because I changed careers,
Right.
but because my mindset shifted as I got older. And I think for me, I mean, it's always a work in progress, because I think that growing up the way I grew up, it was pretty much ingrained in me that like you grow up and you get a good job and you get all the things and and that's the way it is. And I think that um, I've had to learn to redefine success for myself, not out of necessity, but out of desire. And I want to see it differently. And so when I really get down to what do I value most, it's connection.
Mhm. And I will say that, as a geriatric psychologist, I'm just incredibly fortunate to talk to people at the ends of their lives. And rarely do I hear someone say, I wish I had worked more, or I
Yeah.
wish I had, devoted more time to material possessions. It is almost always, I wish that I had spent more time with my partner or my children or my friends, or that I had worked harder to develop relationships. Not across the board, but it is certainly much more likely to be that than it is to be about money.
Yeah.
Because I think those are the things that when as we age, we want to talk to people, we want to connect to people we love, and it feels good to do that.
And I think as we get older, you really separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, you really, boy, you can tell I'm from Kansas sometimes, but um, you really figure out what's important for you. And that might be different for everybody. But I do think that that's where I'm at this point in my life, at least.
So, if you, Vicky, were giving some advice to young creatives coming up who maybe wanted to do either music or writing or even art, but who just wanted to pursue that sort of creative passion, what would you say? What would your advice be?
Oh, I have these conversations all the time with my kids, and I think, like, especially for my daughter, who is such a she's so passionate about music, and but she's also so focused on success and career
Mm.
and all of those things, and worrying about those things. And what my partner and I have always told our kids is, do follow your passion. Don't end up in a career that you don't like just because you wanted the money, and to really listen to that part of yourself that wants that creative life. So, like, if you want to be a musician, try it. If you don't succeed in a way that feels right for you, you can do something else. And I think that, especially young people today, they get the message from a very young age that they need to have it all figured out. You know, like, um, last my daughter was a freshman last year, and one of her teachers told the class, like, everything you do right now determines the rest of your future.
Oh,
And
wow.
that is an incredible amount of pressure. And I think the younger generation right now is under so much pressure that how can you how can you figure out what you want, what's best for you, or where your passion lies when there's so much pressure for a particular kind of success? And so I would say, you know, be open
Mhm.
to all possibilities, and to not tell yourself no, let the world tell you no. So try it, and let somebody else put the limits on you. Don't put them on yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, that's excellent advice. I had a 98-year-old artist, or 90, she's not 98, I'm so sorry, she's 91. She'd probably hate that. There was an artist that I interviewed once who said that her biggest piece of advice was just be willing to try things.
Yeah,
Just be willing to try things, and it's okay if it's not the right one. That
absolutely.
and I think she was feeling the same way, that kids are so pressured to find the right path, and you have to define it right now. And how can you possibly know the right path at 15?
No, I know, like, when I went to college, back in the olden days, in the late 80s, there was just not this pressure. I mean, and, I mentioned that I'm the first woman to graduate from college in my family. But I never felt like it was life or death. And I had every reason to have a family that would put that pressure on me, but it was just like, "Oh, I'll go to college and I'll apply to one, and if I don't get in there, I'll go to
Right.
KU." I mean, I took the ACT once. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just a completely different, and it's just amazing to me how quickly it's changed. And I just, my heart breaks for the pressure on kids today, honestly, because I think, you know, the pressure to succeed in a particular way,
Mhm.
and and to be so closed down to other possibilities or other paths that you're locked into something at 16 or 15 or, you know, I
Mm.
just think it's yeah, heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. So, Vicky, before I ask you, the last thing I want to ask you is to tell us a story about your life. But before I ask you to do that, I just want to go back to your writing just for a minute because I always like to ask people who are writers or musicians, both, or even and artists as well. But sort of, what is your process for writing? So, how does that unfold for you? Is it that you have a storyline in mind and then you write it down? Do you come up with phrases? Like how does that unfold for you as a writer?
I feel like my best stories that I've written come from a very, very specific moment in time. And those are the kind of stories that I like to write. So, something that happened,
Mhm.
but it's very specific. Like, I wrote a story about a waffle iron, and it was a very specific moment that inspired me to write this story about my mother's waffle iron. And I think that my process always involves taking that moment and putting all of the emotion that I felt in that moment into that scene, if you will, and then extrapolating the lessons that I learned from that, or the more relatable global point that the story can hold. So it's pretty much always the same, a specific moment in time, and then infused with the emotion that I felt at that time, and then pulling back to the bigger picture.
Very nice. And when you were writing music and writing songs, was it a similar process or was it really different?
It was it was pretty similar, except for I always wrote the music first. So I would have I'd be messing around on the guitar and I'd come up with a progression of chords or notes or a melody that I really liked. And I would just pursue that. And then once I had a chunk of that, then I would start to write the lyrics. And again, they were always, you know, true to life and from personal experience.
Mhm. Okay. Very nice. So I would love it if you would tell us a story from your life. And I always like to preface this by saying it doesn't have to be the story. It doesn't have to have a big lesson, although it can. From other people, we've had stories as diverse as trying to fry an egg on the sidewalk during the summer when they were a child to literally having an epiphany moment by the side of the road in which their life changed. So we've had a huge gamut of, just it's really run the widest path that you possibly could as far as the types of stories people tell. So if you are willing, we would love to hear a story that just feels like yours.
Okay. Um, I'm usually I do my writing. I write the story. So off the cuff always is a little nerve wracking for me, especially in this kind of situation. But I think that this story ties into um, that idea of connection. So when I was in college, I made very good friends. And we all happened to end up in Minneapolis as young adults. And we all bought houses around a particular park in South Minneapolis called Powderhorn Park. So, literally, like my two best friends from college and I lived north side of the park, east side of the park, and south side of the park. And so, I mean, it really definitely deepened our friendship, not only because we had this history of being students together at Grinnell, but we also had this geographical closeness now. And we all bought houses at the same time. And one of the things that we thought about was like, wow, we're all kind of living this similar experience as young homeowners, of these old houses that need a lot of work. And so we decided we were going to form a housing co op. And so what we would do is once a month, we would meet at someone's house and they would have a project in mind, and everybody would bring the tools that they had, and we would work 8 hours that day on that particular project. And we eventually invited some other households to join, but through the course of that, like, we put in fences, we stripped wallpaper, we put in retaining walls, like we did all of this kind of stuff. And it was great. I mean, it was a great way, and kind of tying into sustainability too, of like shared resources, shared labor, and, this kind of work together. And then time passed, and we all had kids at the same time. And so we thought, wow, we're really all tired, and we have all these babies. And what are we going to do for childcare? And so we started a collective childcare. And so we all raised our children together. And, we had a schedule, and people worked part-time, and we would have all these babies together, 2 adults in a house every day, every weekday. And we raised our kids together to the point now that, like, they're our family. I see these kids, and I'm just invested in watching their growth and success as I am my own. And then as our kids got older and we got busier, more activities and whatever, we were like, wow, it's really hard to manage meals, So we started a supper club where one family would cook. Like, so for 3 times a week, for example, you would cook for 20, and people would come and pick up their family meal and whatever. So like one night a week, you didn't have to cook at all, but you had a home cooked meal. And we did that for a couple of years. I will admit that I think the beet pie might have kind of kicked me out prematurely. I just don't like beets enough to eat a beet pie. But so it's really, that is kind of not only the story of kind of the past 20 years of my life, but also so much why I value connection and relationships. And that no matter what happens, I can look back at my life and say, wow, I built this community, and it sustains me.
And it fits beautifully with that model of sustainability, that you are accessing resources that you have and giving back.
Yeah.
And supporting each other. And that is, sustainability is all about connecting with your neighborhood and taking care of each other and finding ways to do that effectively that work for everyone.
Yeah.
So that is a beautiful story. So, Vikki, is there anything that I haven't asked you in this almost hour of time now that I should? Anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about?
No. Been a great conversation. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
Excellent. So I want to thank you for being here. You were a fantastic guest, and I'm just so glad that you agreed to come on our podcast. And for everybody who's listening, this has been Vikki Reich. Vikki, do you want to just mention again the Listen to Your Mother?
Sure. You can find out more about Listen to Your Mother Twin Cities, which is a live reading event, by going to twincitiescreative.com. That is the website owned by my producing partner, Galit Breen, and I.
And you do that, you said 4 times a year, and it's an in-person event. Is it online as well, or is it just in person?
It is exclusively in person. So we have not had our show in a year.
I was going to say you haven't had anything for a while.
No, and I miss it. I miss it terribly. So
you must be looking forward to it.
We'll be back.
Yeah, it will be back. So if you're in the Twin Cities and you want to check that out, please do. And Vikki, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you again for having me.
This has been Inclusivi-Talks, and we'll be back again with another episode. Thank you.
If she's a mountain